Rebbe, when he needed to go through surgery, and they couldn't sedate him, so he composed a song of about 40 sections under the knife, and that put him through the surgery. It shows the power of music, and the power how a person could the potential a person could remove themselves from. It's told about the Rebbe Rashab, the one which we just quoted from him, that he was once in a certain place and he sat down to meditate, sat for hours. His son, the previous Rebbe, was concerned. What's going to be? Something happened maybe. He wasn't a well man also over the years. He moved the bench, the Rebbe Rashab came out, he says, "What time is it? Where are we?" He was completely removed from everything around him. It's like it's a potential. It's not something that happens on a daily basis by every person. Then the same thing is also with speech. When a person speaks, a person could sometimes, it says there's an expression, nafshe yotza bedabre. His whole soul goes out in his speaking, because this is where his soul is involved in speaking. And not only that his soul goes out with his speaking, and in addition to that, it is also by speaking he will understand something better than before he spoke about it. By speaking about it, it's more clear for him. So this shows the depth of how speech reaches in the neshama. And then finally, reach is the union of smell. This is a very, as we mentioned earlier in regard to spices, it is something that a person sometimes smells something. It elevates the person. It picks the person up in a different world, a different planet. So this shows how the tainug in senses is sometimes different than the tainug. The tainug in the senses of the person is deeper and greater, the pleasure, than the pleasure of the tainug that there is in the personal character traits, even in the intellectual level. Mentioned earlier about tainug and simcha, an interesting thing that dawned on me. When we add up the word tainug, the numerical value of the word tainug is 529. 529 happens to be the chapter in Shulchan Aruch, in the code of the Jewish law, that discusses Simcha of Yom Tov. So this is how they must have some connection. Okay, now we speak about Tainug and Ratzon, and that's where I think we're going to land. The difference between pleasure and will. So Hasidus explains, by pleasure, there is no difference what he has pleasure from. He has pleasure from one thing, from another thing, from a third thing, because the pleasure is not related to the detail, the pleasure is related to the person. And by the person, everything is equal. On the other hand, when it comes to Ratzon, will, there's a specific will, he wants this, he wants that. And therefore, because it relates to the details, that's why there's a difference between the will of one thing and the will of another. And that's why it says also in the Mishnah, in the Pirkei Avos, it doesn't say Chafetz HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem desire. It says Rotz HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He wanted to give merit to the Jewish nation. He gave them 613 commandments. What does it mean, Rotza? Because Rotza breaks down into 613. 613 commandments. It's the will. When it speaks about pleasure, it is the person, as the person is removed from world, and it is only the person. Oh. So therefore, it is the person, there's no difference between one thing and another. Because there's only one point, that's the person's world. Now we get to the inyan that we mentioned earlier, of fasting, a tainus cholim on Shabbos. What is the mechanism here? Is it will over pleasure, or pleasure over will? So on one hand, it is, we would figure, it is tainug over the pleasure over will. He enjoys it, and that's why this becomes his tainug Shabbos. That according to Allah, if he saw a bad dream, and a person is worried about it, he is permitted to fast on Shabbos, because this becomes his tainug Shabbos. This becomes his pleasure. So the question is, in Hasidus it's explained also in a different way, exactly the opposite, that the will is what's controlling the tainug. That why is it that he's permitted to fast? Because his will decides, this is my pleasure. And therefore it becomes his pleasure. So the Rebbe explains that it does not contradict it. Because although the will has overwhelmed the pleasure and said, this becomes the pleasure, but still the pleasure has still survived in the sense that this is what becomes his Tainuk Shabbos. The pleasure is still existing there and is the one that is deciding that this is his Tainuk Shabbos. And the pleasure is what stands out over the Shabbos. And therefore, it is basically the pleasure. Everything begins with pleasure. The world began with pleasure. In timing, pleasure is the highest of heights that we reach in auspicious times. If it's Shabbos, if it's Rosh Hashanah, if it's Yom Kippur. And in the person, pleasure is the top of the person. It is actually the core of a person's neshama. It touches the core of the neshama. And when the world will be refined, and that is when we will have in a very revealed way the tainuk, the revealed pleasure of Hashem, the nachas, the pride that Hashem had that we accomplished in this world. An interesting fact also in regards to how tainuk, pleasure, works on the intellect of the person. Very interesting in the Talmud. Le'elam yilmed adam b'mokem shel libe chafetz. It says a person should learn where his heart desires, where libe chafetz. Chafetz means tainuk, pleasure. What connection does intellect have with pleasure? Is because where will he be successful on intellectual level? If he has the pleasure there. If he has the pleasure there, that's when he will be successful, and to the extent that the Talmud gives out a verdict that where should a person learn? Where he enjoys. B'mokem shel libe chafetz. This would also sometimes be in conflict with the decision of parents, because parents would feel he might be successful in another place. So the Talmud says, Mokem shel libe chafetz, where he desires. So therefore, this is basically how the world begins with Tainuk, and eventually when the world will be in its refined and enhanced condition, the highest climax and level, so then we will see Od Yimole Schek Pinu. That's when we'll see the Schek, the pleasure of Hashem, that we will also benefit from it, and the Almighty should help that we should have it as soon as possible.
Amen. I remember a few weeks ago, you mentioned that the level of pleasure, the source of pleasure, is in the crown, it's in the Keter, which is above the intellect.
Right, because when we speak about a person, a person has all the attributes. So we have the intellect is the head, the emotions the heart. Then we have the crown that is over the head. So this is basically the cerebrum. The cerebrum, there's two layers. One of them is called Rotzum, one is called Tainuk. So this is basically the highest level that overcomes, that is over everything.
Anybody have any questions for the Rabbi? Yes, no.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's interesting. My 6-year-old granddaughter was taught in yeshiva that Hashem's crown receives a jewel each time you do a mitzvah. So that she just learned this week, and so she went to visit my brother who's sick, and she said, "Do you think, Bubby, Hashem got a jewel in his crown when I come and do Bikur Cholim?"
It says that it's
right, for 6-year-old.
Right. It says that the letters from the tefillah, from prayer, it says they're all sewed as stones through the angels, as stones for the crown.
That's what she was taught. She asked me. She put it together with doing Chesed. Do you think Hashem now receives more? It's very sweet.
Right.
Why do you think pleasure is so abused in our society today?
It is something that is on every level. It's very pleasant for people, and therefore it is something that actually drives the person. It forces the person, especially when a person is exposed to certain things. It is something that is right there. You know, it's like the Baditchever, whose yahrzeit was a few weeks ago. Baditchever said to the Almighty, he says, you took the Gan Eden and you put it into books. And he says, you took the Gehenna and you put it into the world. He says, what do you expect from people? They see what they see in front of them. This is what attracts them. The eyes, the seeing is the pleasure. It can drive a person up a wall, but into different things, and not everything is the right thing.
So would you say that when a person is learning and refining himself, he's attaching himself to a higher pleasure?
It's a higher pleasure, the pleasure of Teda. You have, for example, the pleasure of Nadav Aviel, the sons of Aaron. It says that they expired. They expired because they were so closely. Chassidus explains they had such a yearning to connect to godliness that they first expired.